الهدف من هذا الفيديو هو التعرف على OCD Obsessive Compulsive Disorder. الترجمة الحرفية الأوبسيسيف هي مسيطر، مستحوذ، هاجسي، موسوس، إلحاحي، استعجالي. الترجمة الحرفية الكومبولسيف أو compulsions هي إكراهات، إلزامات، قهريات، إجبارات تفعلها وأنت لا تريد فعلها، تفعلها بالرغم عنك. Obsessive Compulsive Disorder ترجمتها بالعربية هي مرض الوسواس القهري، أو مرض الاستحواذ الإكراهي، أو مرض الاستحواذ الإلزامي. ما هو تعريف OCD في علم النفس؟ اضطراب الاستحواذ الإكراهي هو مرض شائع ومزمن يعاني فيه الشخص من أفكار غير متحكم بها ولا يمكنه السيطرة عليها، استحواذات وتصرفات إكراهات تدفع الشخص بإلحاح لتكرارها المرة تلو الأخرى. تتداخل هذه الاستحواذات والإكراهات مع الأنشطة اليومية وتتسبب في ضيق كبير للشخص. قد يحاول الشخص تجاهل الأفكار المستحوذة أو إيقافها، ولكن هذا فقط يزيد من ضيقه وقلقه. وفي نهاية المطاف يشعر بأنه مدفوع لأداء هذه الأفعال الإكراهية في محاولة لتخفيف التوتر، على الرغم من الجهود المبذولة لتجاهل أو التخلص من الأفكار أو الإلحاحات المزعجة، إلا أنهم يستمرون في العودة. وهذا يؤدي إلى سلوكات أكثر طقوسية بما يسمى الحلقة المفرغة لأوسيدي The Vicious Cycle of OCD، اللي هي خط النهاية يؤدي إلى نفس نتيجة خط البداية. داك المشكل باش بديتي ودرتي دوك الطقوس باش تحيدهم كيرجعك في نفس المشكل عاوتاني، خاصك دير دوك باقي داك المشكل وخاصك دير دوك الطقوس عاوتاني، يعني حلقة مفرغة. OCD بكل بساطة هو مرض استحواذات وإكراهات. تعريف الاستحواذات الاصطلاحي: الاستحواذات هي أفكار وصور متكررة ومستمرة وغير مرغوب فيها تسبب الضيق أو القلق. يحاول الشخص تجاهلها أو التخلص منها عن طريق أداء الإكراهات أو الطقوس الإلزامية. وعادة ما تأتي هذه الاستحواذات عندما يحاول الشخص التفكير أو القيام بأشياء أخرى. جزء التعريف تاع الإكراهات الاصطلاحي: الإكراهات هي سلوكيات متكررة يشعر الشخص أنه مدفوع وملزوم على أدائها. تهدف هذه السلوكيات المتكررة أو الأفعال العقلية إلى تقليل القلق المرتبط بالاستحواذات والهواجس، أو كوسيلة لمنع حدوث شيء سيء. ومع ذلك فإن الانخراط في الإكراهات لا يجلب أي متعة ويقدم فقط راحة مؤقتة من القلق. يمكن الشخص أن يقوم بوضع قواعد أو طقوس لاتباعها تساعده في التحكم في قلقه عندما يكون لديه هذه الأفكار المستحوذة. هذه الإكراهات تكون مفرطة وغالبا ما لا ترتبط واقعيا بالمشكلة التي تهدف إصلاحها. هذه معلومات جمعتهم على OCD، هذه هي استحواذات إكراهات. هاد الفيديوهات اللي غيبداو دابا شويه غيشرحوا مزيان OCD. بغيت نقول لكم على حاجه: بينك وبين التحكم في العقل ديالك هو فهم عميق للOCD. الراحه العقليه اللي كيحس بها الانسان اللي غلب OCD ما كيحس بهاش الانسان العادي. حيت اي انسان في بعض الاوقات التصرفات تاعو تيخضعوا لهذا القانون هذا، افكار لا عقلانيه وبالتالي تصرفات ايضا لا عقلانيه، ولكنها لا ترتقي لتشخيصها كمرض. الخطورة تاعها ما كترتقيش لدرجة تاع أنها OCD، ولكن الإنسان اللي غلب OCD كيقدر يشوفها، الإنسان العادي ما كتبانلهش، وبالتالي تكون داك اللي عنده OCD واحد الراحة عقلية صعيب يفهمها الإنسان العادي. لذلك هاد الفيديوهات اللي ما كانش عندك هذا المرض، هاد الفيديوهات اللي غتشوف دابا حاول ترجع اللاوعي، رجعوا وعي وشوف هاد الفيديوهات باهتمام كبير وتركيز باش تحاول تخدم هاد الأوسيدي في حياتك اليومية. اوكي بليز واتش.
No matter what I tried, the thoughts kept coming. I had horrible thoughts about hurting my fiancé. The only thing that made them go away was counting by tens.
I knew I unplugged my curling iron every morning. I was positive I did. But as soon as I got out the door, the thoughts started. Thoughts that I left it on and that it would start a fire. I had to go back and check, again and again.
My apartment building has a speed bump on the way out. Every time I drove over it, I was terrified I ran someone over. I had to turn around, get out, and check. I never got out of my parking lot.
Every public surface I touched felt full of germs. The only way I'd feel better was to wash my hands. I did it 20 times a day sometimes even more.
These are the voices of obsessive compulsive disorder, or OCD. OCD is a serious condition that causes great distress and really impacts people's lives. People become overwhelmed by their thoughts and anxiety and feel like hostages to the rituals that help take away that anxiety. I know. One of these voices is mine. People with OCD experience obsessions, which are specific thoughts that are intense and intrusive. People don't choose to have them, and they're often very distressing. Obsessions make it hard to concentrate or get anything done. A lot of times, these thoughts are about germs or safety, but they could be about anything, really. In my case, it was my curling iron. If you asked me, I would tell you I know I unplugged it. I remember doing it. But the thoughts that I didn't were so strong, telling me I left it on. It was so scary, and it made me feel unsafe. Like my house might burn down, all because of my curling iron. The second symptom of OCD is compulsions. These are ritual behaviors, and people with OCD do them to help deal with the anxiety, horror, or distress they feel because of their obsessive thoughts. There are many types of compulsive behaviors, but they often focus on washing or cleaning, checking on things for safety, or repeating words or numbers. In my case, I had to check on that curling iron. I came back to my house, went upstairs, saw it was unplugged, left again for work, and then I would repeat it, all over again. It was really tough for me to get to work on any given day. I knew I didn't need to do this at all, but it felt totally out of control. There's good news. OCD is treatable. Several types of treatment are effective, and people with OCD can overcome their obsessive thoughts and ritual behaviors that have controlled their lives. Cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, is the most effective treatment. In CBT, people work hard to challenge their thoughts and change the behaviors that follow. There is a specific type of CBT that is used just for those of us with OCD. It's called exposure and response prevention, or ERP, and it works to help us delay or resist ritual compulsions and cope with the resulting anxiety in a different manner. Over time, the anxiety becomes less disruptive and can even disappear. In addition, many people find relief from a specific medication that helps with getting those obsessive thoughts under control. Several SSRIs are used with OCD, and they really make a difference for a lot of people. A combination of ERP and medication is often the best choice for many people. It was for me. The medication took the edge off my anxiety, and my thoughts about the curling iron got a lot less distressing. In therapy, I learned how to postpone going back to check on it. It was so hard at first, but my therapist guided me in doing this, and I learned to get through the anxiety. Eventually, I proved to myself I could do it.
Double-checking things is a pretty common human behavior. Like, did I shut the garage door? Better double-check. How about locking the front door? Double-check. Gas stove and oven off? Double-check. We all do it, but what if you feel compelled to triple-check it, or even quadruple-check it, or quintuple-check it even? Then it might be considered an obsession. Now, what if you have to do a certain ritual with the gas stove and oven before leaving the home each time? Like, make sure the gas stove is off, wipe down the gas stove to clean it, double check that the burners are off, make sure the oven's off, wipe down the oven to clean it, and then open the oven door to make sure no heat's coming out, and then you can leave the house. Then that might be a compulsion. Obsessive compulsive disorder, or OCD, is a specific type of anxiety disorder characterized by these obsessions or compulsions. Obsessions are recurrent and intrusive thoughts that are typically unwanted and tough to get out of your brain. These unwanted thoughts, like "my house is unsafe," cause anxiety, and usually they lead to compulsions, which are actions that might be performed to try and reduce the anxiety associated with obsessions. As you might imagine, these thoughts and rituals can have a serious impact on someone's daily life. OCD affects around 3% of the population, and affects both men and women equally, and usually starts in childhood or in the teen years. Celebrities like David Beckham and Howie Mandel are known to be affected by OCD, and a more severe example is that of Howard Hughes, business tycoon and entrepreneur, among other things, who was affected by a relatively incapacitating OCD later in his life. Although obsessive-compulsive includes both obsessions and compulsions, one doesn't need both obsessions and compulsions for a diagnosis. Some individuals might have just obsessions or just compulsions, but the majority of patients have both, often where the compulsion is performed to alleviate an obsession. A very common compulsion is cleaning, which often stems from an obsession with germs or contamination. Another common compulsion is checking, usually because they have obsessions that something's unsafe, so they'll check to make sure that something's definitely safe by unlocking and relocking it, sometimes several times. More generally, though, repeating is a compulsion on its own, where an action or phrase is repeated several times, and usually this is done because if it's not, they think something bad will happen. Sometimes patients might feel compelled to order or arrange things, because when they're out of order, it causes anxiety and discomfort. Finally, mental rituals are also obsessions. These are often done to try to neutralize intrusive or what they think are bad thoughts. So they might try and call up specific words or phrases they think are good thoughts to try and replace the bad thoughts. Now, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders, the 5th edition, or the DSM-5, gives specific diagnostic criteria to meet for a diagnosis of OCD. First and foremost, they need to have the presence of obsessions, compulsions, or both. Makes sense. The obsessions and/or compulsions need to also be time-consuming, often such that it produces distress with their social life and their work. For example, taking 2 hours every day folding and unfolding clothes and then being late for work. It's also important that the obsessions and compulsions are not due to the physiological effects of a substance or other medical condition. Finally, the apparent anxiety isn't better explained by another mental disorder, like for example, an obsession with personal appearance, like in dysmorphic disorder. Like most mental disorders, there isn't a known cause of OCD, though it's thought to be a combination of genetic and environmental factors. Treatment usually involves psychotherapy, medications, or both. Among psychotherapy options, cognitive behavior therapy has been effective, specifically a technique called exposure and response therapy, where patients are first exposed to the anxiety and compulsion-provoking situation, ultimately showing that the anxiety actually lessens when the compulsion is not carried out.
In essence, suffering with OCD is like being in hell. And it's a hell that you're aware of, which makes it really difficult. Unlike a lot of mental disorders, there's this dual existence between this healthy part of your brain and the OCD, and they're existing simultaneously. So the healthy part of your brain is going, everything that you're thinking and everything that you want to do compulsively is illogical and it makes no sense whatsoever. But then the OCD part of your brain is going, you have to do this or this is going to happen.
Right.
And you listen to the OCD part of your brain, knowing that it makes absolutely no sense whatsoever, but you just want to get rid of that feeling. The definition of OCD are obsessions, right? Thoughts, images, feelings on a loop that we don't want to have. They make us uncomfortable. They give us anxiety, a really uncomfortable feeling. And then to alleviate that feeling, we engage in a compulsion. Washing your hands, tapping, praying, a variety of things. That compulsion alleviates the anxiety from the thought. The vicious loop is that it only alleviates the anxiety for a short time. After a while, the thoughts come back, the fears come back, the emotion and anxiety comes back, and you re-engage in the compulsion. And over time, the amount that it alleviates the pain is shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter until you're compulsing constantly because you're just trying to get that sense of relief.
So when did it start showing up in your life?
As early as I could form words and talk and make complete thoughts, I think it was present. When I was in kindergarten, there was an eclipse of the sun. And the teacher was telling us that if we wanted to watch the eclipse, we had to do it this certain way, because otherwise you can't stare at the sun because you'll go blind. And I became obsessed that my mother was going to look at the sun and go blind. So I came home and I told her, you can't look at the sun, you can't watch the sun, you can't go outdoors. I didn't want to leave her side. I wanted to protect her, to make sure that she wasn't going to look at the sun and go blind. And we went through all kinds of, I'm going to wear a sign, or you can call me. I ended up not going to school the day of the eclipse to stay with her, to make sure that she wouldn't look at the sun. First, second, third, fourth grade, they were really hard. I mean, I was just constantly afraid of everything. I was afraid of swallowing. Every day going to school was a massive battle, crying, screaming. I would fake illnesses. I would do anything to just stay at home and not go to school, because of just all these fears and thoughts and bombarding my head constantly. I had this terrible fear of illness in high school. I carried 3 thermometers around with me every day and took my temperature 80, 90 times a day. A headache was a brain tumor, and a fever was meningitis, and it was just all this extreme health anxiety.
I couldn't leave the house certain days. My anxiety was skyrocket to where I couldn't even say my name sometimes in a public environment, because I had to count how many people were in the room, how many people I could hurt, how many people would be around me if I just fell dead on the floor, who would help me? And those are thoughts that I was thinking, but when I talk about them now, I'm like, how could I have ever thought those things? But they're so normal for people like me.
The time from diagnosis to treatment, actual treatment, was 17 years. So I didn't receive the proper treatment, exposure response prevention, and other treatments, cognitive behavioral therapy, until I was 30 years old.
My daughter Breland has OCD, but I gotta tell you, it's nothing like the Instagram version that you post and hashtag. OCD, or obsessive compulsive disorder, is neither a verb nor an adjective as you use it on social media. You gotta know that. It's also a serious condition, a disorder that results from a chemical imbalance in the brain, and it is never a choice. Perhaps I can paint the picture of what the OCD that we came to know and live with looked like. One night, about 9 o'clock, Breland came home from work. It was a freezing cold night in the dark of winter, and it wasn't until after about 3 hours of her coming home that the OCD kicked in to convince her that she'd hit someone on her way home from work. She decided she had to go out and check the roadsides and ditches. So the thing is, going back to check to see if she'd hit something or someone, that was not uncommon for Bree. Driving was difficult and stressful for her. She was obsessively concerned with hurting someone with her car. The 3-mile commute to her waitress job could take her upwards of an hour due to the repeated looping back and forth to check her path. You would think she would have known every pothole in the road, but the OCD demanded that those bumps she felt as she was driving were not potholes, but people. So this night, as Breland went to leave the house, her then fiance tried to restrain her. It almost cost him their engagement. Her dad led her through good, solid logic of why going out and checking was absolutely not necessary. It was at this point that Breland threw back her shoulders in a fit of rage and tears and emphatically announced she was driving to the police station to turn herself in if no one would let her go out and check the roadsides for bodies. Here was this gentle soul who would never intentionally hurt anyone, who honestly believed she'd killed someone, left them injured and alone in a ditch in the dark to die in the freezing cold. Just imagine her anguish. It was moments like this that made me hate the OCD so bad I could literally taste it. But years of experience with this monster led me to deal differently. So I said, Bree, maybe you should go turn yourself into the police. The OCD was startled, shocked, and left Breland without the support of a retort. So I continued, "What do you think the police are going to tell you, Bree?" She insisted they would throw her in jail, and she deserved to be there. Again, I agreed to a point. Breland, I think they're going to see that you need to be removed from society for a little while, but not thrown in jail. They'll be able to tell you're already living in a cage and being managed by a monster. More than likely, they'll suggest to stay in a mental hospital where you can get the help you need. And Breland, you need help to beat this. The OCD was outwitted long enough for Breland to regroup and summon the skills and strategies she had spent years practicing. She didn't go out, check the roadsides that night, nor did she go turn herself into the police. But let's note, reason nor restraint were effective for her, but it was the strategies that she had learned and practiced for years that allowed her the escape. Breland was first diagnosed with OCD when she was about 8 years old. And as parents, we really struggled to understand and find ways to help her battle. What we arrived at was a strategy built on a simple analogy. We compared Breland's OCD to a monster. Not the kind of monster she needed to fear, but a hungry monster that constantly demanded to be fed. The monster represented Breland's obsessions. They came into her brain uninvited, set up monster camp, or an intrusive thought loop that just played over and over. And the way it wanted to be fed was through the compulsions, or the behaviors that she needed to perform perfectly and ritualistically. The thing is, performing those behaviors never satisfied the monster, ever. In fact, the only thing that did is to make the monster grow bigger and stronger. And bigger monsters are hungrier monsters and grow more insistent with size. So we told Breland the way to quiet the monster was to starve it. Hungry monsters grow weak and eventually tired. So the longer she could delay feeding it or performing the rituals it asked for, the quieter it would become over time. Starving the monster worked, but it required Breland to make a very difficult decision between living for a short time in an extreme and excruciating amount of discomfort and anxiety, or living a lifetime with the monster roaring. It's a strategy that offers hope that things can get better. It offers compassion for the pain and suffering associated with the OCD. It offers empowerment for those with OCD to know that there's something they can actually do about it, and encouragement for them to keep doing it.
أمثلة على الاستحواذات: الخوف من التلوث أو القاذورات، الشك ومواجهة الصعوبة في تحمل عدم اليقين، الحاجة إلى أن تكون الأشياء بشكل منظم ومتناسق، أفكار عدوانية أو مروعة حول فقدان السيطرة وإيذاء نفسك أو الآخرين، أفكار غير مرغوب فيها بما ذلك العنف أو الموضوعات الجنسية أو الدينية، الخوف من التعرض للتلوث عبر لمس أشياء قام آخرون بلمسها، الشك في أنك أغلقت الباب أو أطفأت الموقد، التوتر الشديد عندما تكون الأشياء غير مرتبة أو في اتجاه معين، صور لقيادة سيارتك وسط حشد من الناس، أفكار حول الصراخ بألفاظ بذيئة أو تصرف بشكل غير لائق في الأماكن العامة، صور جنسية مزعجة، تجنب مواقف التي يمكن أن تحفز الوسواس مثل المصافحة بالأيدي. يعني هذا كان الأمثلة على الاستحواذات. أمثلة على الإكراهات compulsions: الغسيل والتنظيف، الفحص، العد، الحفاظ على النظام، اتباع روتين صارم، المبالغة في الطمأنة، مبالغة في التأكيد، غسل اليدين حتى تصبح بشرتك مؤلمة نتيجة شدة فرك اليدين، فحص الأبواب بشكل متكرر للتأكد من قفلها، فحص الموقد بشكل متكرر للتأكد من إيقاف تشغيله، العد بأنماط معينة، تكرار الدعاء أو الكلمة أو العبارة بصمت. كانوا هذوما أمثلة على الإكراهات. Good. فهذا الطرق ديال الله شفنا فيه هذه القاعدة للتغلب على أوسيدي واللي هي starve the monster، تجويع الوحش. واحد الحاجة، هذه القاعدة راه معروفة في علم النفس، لقيتها شحال من كتاب، ماشي هاد المرأة اللي اخترعتها. الوحش هو أوسيدي والطعام ديالو هو الإكراهات. كلما يقوم الشخص بالإكراهات كلما أكل الوحش وبالتالي يزداد قوة، وكلما لم يقم الشخص بالإكراهات كلما جاع الوحش وبالتالي يزداد ضعفا ويموت في النهاية. يعني باش ما درتش الإكراهات، باش ما الأوسيدي كتزاد، باش ما حبستيهم، باش ما الأوسيدي كتخفاف وبالتالي كتموت. starve the monster اللي كتعني stop compulsions هو الشرط الأساسي للتغلب على الماضي اللي غنشوفه في الحلقة 6، حيث الماضي مباقيش كيدخلك في حياتك اليومية بأي طريقة، لا فائدة منها، مباقيش يدخلك، كيولوا الحركات تاعك والأفعال تاعك كيزيدوك لقدام، ما كيرجعوكش للور باقي. في الآخر تاع الفيديو حاول من الآن فصاعدا تشوف تصرفات تاعك من هذه الزاويتين المختلفتين، تصرفات إكراهية وتصرفات غير إكراهية، بمعنى تصرفات طبيعية. التصرفات الإكراهية هي بكل بساطة طقوس ولا تنسجم مع الواقع، لا تفيد في أي شيء. تصرفات الغير إكراهية بمعنى تصرفات طبيعية تنسجم مع الواقع ولا تعرقل حياتك اليومية، والقيام بها يحدث تغييرا وفرقا. Okay, thank you very much.